I was creeping out of my bed to check. The second my foot hit the floor, the mattress above me moved. It scared the hell out of me, so I quickly ran to flick the light on, then turned around to face the bed. My hairs stood on end, and I started to cry, the very moment I realised there was nobody else in the room. Watch until the end of this video to hear the full story. I'm your host, Severed Soul. It took me a while to realise that what I saw must have been a ghost, and to this day, thinking about it still chills me to my core. It happened approximately 25 years ago. I was working at an antiquarian bookstore in uptown New York. The store was approximately 25 miles east of Rochester. This is when I had my only direct visual interaction with a supernatural entity. I remember it very clearly because the owner of the bookstore had been involved in a minor traffic accident just a few days before. The insurance adjusters were at the store, in the parking lot out the back, taking photos of his van. The time was approximately 9 o'clock in the morning. The only other employee inside the store was positioned perfectly to see this thing that I saw, and she swears that she saw nothing. I entered the store and stood there talking to her briefly as I looked to my right down the classic literature section, and that is when I saw it. I know it was not a hallucination, and I was stone cold sober, having only had a coffee that morning. A few hours later, when I was heading out to my coffee break, I casually asked my co-worker if she had seen what I had seen. It was perfectly in her line of sight, so there was absolutely no way she wouldn't have seen it. What I saw was as real as day, but she absolutely insisted that she hadn't seen it. Again, this thing that I saw was perfectly in her line of sight, so this just seemed impossible to me. I remember almost getting annoyed with her, because she is not the type to mess about. She is old school New England, and is about the most honest person I've ever met. She swore blind that there was absolutely nothing there, and probably presumed that I was on drugs. I should mention that the bookstore isn't just filled with books, but really old books, including an edition of Athanasius Kircher's Epidus Aegyptiacus from the 1600s. This book, in particular, is valued at around $3 million. The store also has a display of old hats and antiques from various time periods. So, going back to what I'd seen earlier that day, I was working on the computer, carrying out some data entry, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I got the feeling I was being watched. It was an unwavering feeling, and I couldn't resist the urge to look up. When I looked up from the computer, I was shocked to see a very tall, very stoic man dressed in full Native American regalia. I mean, feathered headdress, buckskin leggings, etc. I hadn't heard anybody come into the store, and I definitely would have noticed if someone had have walked past me. I froze in shock, and I really didn't know how to react. He wasn't looking at the books on the shelf. He was standing there, with his arms folded, looking directly at me. He seemed to have nodded slightly, so I awkwardly nodded back. I looked over at my co-worker, who at this point was talking to me, and seemed to have no acknowledgement of this man standing in full Native American attire. Talking to her later, it became abundantly clear that she really hadn't seen him, and that what I had seen must have been a ghost. The weird thing is, the store burned down less than 2 weeks later. I sometimes wonder if that entity was trying to warn me about potential danger. I don't know for sure, but I do know that it was definitely the strangest experience of my life, and I'll never forget it. So, this happened one night when me, my dad, and my stepmother were watching a film while my 3 little brothers were sleeping. It was about 10:30 p.m, I think. Anyway, me and my stepmother were sitting next to each other on the sofa. The stairs were on the right, and my dad was sitting on the other sofa just in front of us, with the television high on the wall just in front of him. We were very tired and waiting for the film to finish so that we could go to sleep. And that is when I heard it. I was quite unnerved, even though this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Strange noises, shadows, and disembodied voices had become a regular occurrence in our house. On the odd occasion, we will hear heavy breathing and gasping, and the dogs will stare, growl, and bark at, well, seemingly nothing. When I heard it, initially I thought maybe I was just hearing things. That was until I saw my stepmother turn her head towards the stairs, because she could hear it too. It's important to mention that the previous owner of our house was an old lady who lived here on her own. We had been informed when we bought the house that sadly the old lady had passed away in one of the upstairs bedrooms. Anyway, at first I thought that one of my brothers had woken up and were coming down the stairs. In fact, I was looking at the stairs in anticipation of seeing one of them coming down. What I could hear was slow, heavy footsteps making their way down the stairs. As the footsteps reached a point where I would definitely have been able to see whoever was descending the stairs, every hair on my body stood on end, because there was absolutely nobody there. Me and my stepmother exchanged a look of absolute terror as the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs and came to a halt. We looked at each other once more before jumping up to go and check. Nobody. There was absolutely nobody there. My little brothers were still sleeping peacefully, and we checked every corner of the house. We both heard it. Very clearly, footsteps coming down the stairs. Since this incident, one of my little brothers has been waking up in the middle of the night, screaming and crying out of nowhere. And everything seems to connect to the same room. The room that was previously inhabited by that old lady. We all believe that there's a paranormal force at work in our house, and I believe that it's down to that old lady. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. I'm a freshman in college, and I've had more than just one paranormal encounter. But this is by far the most terrifying experience of my life. I attend an all-girls Catholic school, and it's well over 100 years old. It has a cemetery on campus for the nuns who have attended there. That's not really relevant to this story, but I just wanted to provide some context. Anyway, it was about 10 p.m. on a weekday, and I started getting the urge to pee, and I really needed to use the restroom. I tended to use the restroom in the basement. I hate going to the restroom on my floor because somebody is always in there, and I like my privacy. Before I tell you this next part, I just want to say that this is something I've done many times. I've never faced any problems until that day. Safe to say, after this happened, I'll never be using the bathroom down there again. So, as I mentioned, I use the restroom in the basement. Despite what happened to me down there, I should point out that the basement doesn't look like what you probably think it looks like. It actually looks pretty decent, and it connects to the first floor lobby via a small staircase. So, up until this point, I was never afraid. Not only that, but the restroom down there is actually pretty nice and clean. When the elevator brought me down to the basement, I walked into the restroom getting ready to do my business. When I opened the bathroom door, the first thing I noticed was that one of the stalls was closed. I was surprised, because in all the times I've been down here, there's hardly ever anyone down there. Well, besides one freshman teammate of mine who does the same. So, initially thinking it was her, I called out to her, but was met with silence. With curiosity getting the better of me, I peered underneath the stall door, expecting to see her blue Crocs. Except, I could see no feet. There was nothing there at all. At this point, I'll admit, I was a bit creeped out. So I figured that someone was probably just embarrassed that I'd walked in and picked their feet up off the floor so they couldn't be seen. I decided to leave them alone. But, as I turned my back to leave, that's when something absolutely terrifying happened. So terrifying, in fact, that I simply turned and ran as fast as I could. It sounded like the toilet paper in that stall was being violently and rapidly pulled out of the dispenser. It was being pulled so fast that I could hear the dispenser vibrating loudly. I looked down to the bottom of the door, and I could see that the toilet paper was piling up inside the stall. My heart was racing in my chest. I tried to rationalise and convince myself that somebody was in there and that they were just in a rush. In one last, desperate attempt, with a shaky voice I called out again. But this time, I was met with a series of deafeningly loud bangs on the door of that stall. So, as I said, I turned and ran as fast as I could. I left and headed towards the elevator. I pushed the button and eagerly awaited the doors to open. Then, the banging from inside the bathroom suddenly stopped. The lift was taking forever, and I was anxiously praying for it to hurry up. I could really feel my pulse racing by now. Just as I was losing my patience, I heard the stall door from inside the bathroom slam open against the wall. It flew open as if somebody had kicked it. The lift still hadn't arrived, so at this point I knew that taking the stairs was the smart option. The stairwell is located right next to the elevator, so I wasted no time. I opened the basement door, and just as I stepped into the stairwell, I heard the bathroom door slam open. Once again, it was as if somebody had kicked it with enough force to make it slam against the wall. My brain was telling me that it was just a person who was in a rush. My body didn't give me chance to turn around and check. Just as I made it up the first flight of stairs, the most horrifying thing happened. The basement door that I had just walked through smashed open again. It was at this point that my heart sank as I realised my worst fear. I realised I was wrong. This was not a person. Whatever it was now right behind me. I could clearly hear loud, heavy footsteps quickly climbing the stairs directly behind me. They were approaching me at an alarming rate. But the most terrifying part of this whole nightmare scenario was that I could see nobody there. I was absolutely scared shitless, but I went straight into survival mode. I had already passed the first floor door, and I only lived on the second floor. So I started running faster than I ever knew I was capable of. The other set of footsteps seemed to be echoing louder and louder throughout the stairwell. I was panicking, fumbling with my keys, trying to get them ready to open the door. When I reached my front door, my heart was pounding, and I unlocked it as fast as I possibly could. I could still hear those footsteps getting closer and louder. I ran inside, slammed the door behind me and bolted it shut. I slid down to the ground with my back against the door and waited in silence. Just a second later, the same loud footsteps ran through the hall and sounded like they'd stopped dead in the middle of the corridor. Nervously, I stood up and looked through the peephole. I was hoping to God that I might see my teammate and that this was just all an elaborate hoax. But, again, I could see nothing, apart from the stairwell door slowly closing. There was absolutely nobody there. Eventually, I worked up the courage to open the door. I ran into the middle of that area to look down the hallway, but still, I could see nothing. There was absolutely nowhere to hide, and it wasn't humanly possible for anyone to run that fast. I still try to reason with myself and convince myself that it was just a person and they were in a rush and I hadn't seen them. But the sound of that toilet dispenser, the banging on the toilet door, and the sound of those footsteps chasing me up the stairs, it all still haunts me to this day. The whole incident was totally spine-chilling. The only thing I'm absolutely certain about is that I'll never go down there to use the bathroom again. The story I'm about to tell you took place in the middle of my second semester. During winter break, my roommate decided to bunk our beds. I had gone home and she stayed on campus, so she and her cousin converted the beds. I was excited about it since we had spoken about it before. When I came back to school, I had the bottom bunk, which I was grateful for. Every time my roommate laid on the top bunk, the bottom of her mattress would sag under her weight. I would often put my feet under her mattress and push her in the air, making her jump. We both found it quite funny. She worked for Amazon and had the graveyard shift. On the weekends and a couple of weekdays, she would leave at around 6 p.m. and come back at 5 a.m. in the morning. One particular Friday night, I had returned to my dorm at about 10 p.m. after hanging out with some friends. I knew the room would be empty, as my roommate had left for work hours ago. But I remember I got this really uneasy feeling as soon as I entered the room. It was a feeling I'd never had before. I was stood in the doorway, looking around the room, expecting to see something out of place. But everything looked fine. There was nothing out of place. Nothing looked weird. I just got this funny feeling. I even thought about sleeping in one of my friends' rooms, but I was too exhausted and just brushed it off as tiredness. I changed into my pyjamas, threw on my headphones, and before I knew it, I drifted off to sleep. I had no idea what the time was when I woke up, but I do remember being freezing cold, despite usually being really hot in that room. I remember looking around the room, and everything was lit up in a deep red due to my roommate's LED lights. I was confused that they were on, until something caught my attention. I listened attentively, and what I heard was absolute nightmare fuel. I could hear what sounded like a man breathing from up above. It sounded very raspy, but it was very quiet, so I couldn't quite work out if the noise was in my head, or if I was really hearing it. I could feel the uneasiness as it started creeping up my spine. My head whipped around, and I was staring at the sagging mattress above me. I breathed a momentary sigh of relief when I realised it was just my roommate. At this point, I was thinking that she'd snuck someone in while I slept. I put my feet under her mattress and gently pushed. But this time, it felt heavier than usual. Like, a lot heavier. I heard the raspy moan again. This time it was louder, and it was definitely coming from above. The sound of it really stuck dead in me. It sounded like an old man sleeping with his mouth open. It was like the sound a heavy smoker makes when they're struggling for breath. That's the best way to describe it. When I noticed it was pitch black outside, I wondered what time it was. When my roommate got back, the sun was usually peeking through, so I reached for my phone to check the time, and my heart sunk. It was only midnight, and my roommate never got off early, let alone 5 hours early. At this point, I was absolutely terrified, and knew that there was no way I'd be able to sleep until I saw for myself who was in that bed. If she did sneak someone in, I would definitely be kind of pissed, so I really needed to check. I was creeping out of my bed to have a look. The very second my foot hit the floor, that mattress above me shifted. But the sound of it moving wasn't any type of shuffling. It was like all of the weight on that mattress had now been lifted. It scared the absolute hell out of me, so I quickly ran to flick on the light and turned around to face the bed. My hairs stood on end, and I started to cry the very moment I realised that there was nobody else in the room. I just remember feeling absolutely terrified. I felt like all the blood had been drained out of my body. The whole thing felt like it lasted a few hours, when in reality, it was only really a few minutes. There was nobody else awake at this hour, so I called some of my friends from back home, since I was still a few hours ahead of them. I was crying on the phone, explaining to them exactly what had happened. I had all the lights on in the room, and was sitting at my desk while I was talking to them. But I got the impression they weren't taking me seriously. I hung up the phone, feeling agitated and exhausted, but knew there was no way I was going to get back to sleep. I watched TV until my roommate arrived back home and explained to her what had happened. Surprisingly, my roommate laughed it off. That was until she climbed up onto her bunk. Just then, her attitude shifted. She asked me if I had been up onto her bunk. Of course, I said no. When I asked why, she said because her bed was messy, and before she'd left for work, she definitely made it. She also said that her pillow absolutely reeked of cigarettes. Neither of us have ever smoked in our lives. After this incident, I could never sleep with the lights off in that room. The sound of that raspy moaning and the sound of the mattress have really stuck with me since. When I go back next year, I won't be having a roommate. Which is probably a good thing, since me and her departed on bad terms. I have had other paranormal encounters, but this creeped me out the most by far. Have you ever experienced anything like this? Let us know in the comments. That wraps things up for today. I really hope those stories give you nightmares. As always, leave your thoughts in the comments section. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. Thanks for watching. I'm your host, Severed Soul.